Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My guest today is Eric from the Gun Gamers YouTube channel and Gun Gamers Production. Eric is a friend of the show. He's been on the podcast a few times. But for those of you who maybe haven't heard those episodes before, Eric is an airsofter from the Eastern United States who has a lot of experience with airsoft events of all types, from your local skirmish events on the weekends to more national level airsoft events like American Milsim's Copperhead to your really hardcore Milsim events like Milsim West. And just to be clear, when I use the term national level event, I mean games where players travel from all around the country and even internationally to attend. So it's not just limited to the United States. Like we can be talking about Border War in Europe, for example, is an example of a national level event. So just keep that in mind while we talk about that today. So Eric has been both a player and an admin at all these types of airsoft events, and he and his crew has spent a lot of time considering game design, gameplay elements, and player experience in particular, which is why I'm so glad to have him on the podcast today, because many of you will know that myself and my teammate John have the opportunity to travel to attend American Milsim's Iron Horse in the new year in 2024. And this is going to be our very first experience with a national level airsoft event. And while we're really fortunate to be attending with a crew of experienced players, the idea of that game is still really daunting to me and to John. And that's because there's so many unknowns, not just because we're traveling to another country and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure that many other airsofters feel or have felt this way before attending their first game. This like a game of that magnitude. And for some of you, it might even be the main driver, aside from cost, why you haven't made the move to check it out. So today, I thought Eric and I would have a chat about how to prepare for events like this. Not so much in terms of the gear and stuff that you're going to bring, but more in terms of setting the right expectations, planning, the mindset, and so on. So Eric, thanks so much for being here to chat about that today.
Of course, dude. I'm super glad to be here. Always fun to come on. And I will elaborate. I've actually never been to AMS Copperhead. I've been to AMS Faded Giant back when they did that. And I've done the Eastern Front games at Zulu that they run here. But for the most part, I do Milsim West now.
Gotcha.
So a little bit different, but I am familiar with all the formats.
Right, and you've been playing airsoft for quite a while, and I think you've been attending these large events in some capacity for a while. Do you remember sort of what the first big national level event that you attended, and what was that, and what was your experience with airsoft prior to making the jump to a game like that?
So I had started out playing basically backyard airsoft, right? Like a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend who owned some property on the edge of town, and we would just go and play on this piece of property. And it was just me and 6 to 12 guys. And even back then, I was kind of the guy. I wanted to do the hostage missions and all that LARPy crap. Everyone else wanted to shoot each other. But we started going to a local field called Hunter's Creek, which was at the time like a mecca for the Western New York scene. You would get games out there that were 80 to 100 players, and that was a big deal at the time. To get 100 players to a game, it's like, oh my God. So I played some local fields, Hunter's Creek, Black Ops Airsoft / Penyan Airsoft, if any old Western New York hands are watching, Warzone. But then Lion Claws actually came to Buffalo. There was an old decommissioned grain mill on the Niagara River in Buffalo. And we actually got to play an airsoft game in an old grain mill. Somebody had a tornado grenade land in a pile of dead bird. That was horrible, but... so I guess I would say that was the first, because Lion Claws at the time was a much bigger promoter. Now I feel like they don't run nearly as many games. But they were the national level scene at the time. And that was the first time that I played something that was that kind of game. And there was a few hundred players. Amped Airsoft was there. It was a big deal for the Western New York scene. And that was, so it came to me.
Mm-hmm. And what was your experience in your airsoft scene and going to that? How were you feeling in that lead up to that event? Was it very much I'm nervous about what this is going to be like, or it's that or were you thinking about, one of the things we often hear is people being like, oh my God, I'm going to go to these games and people are going to be so much better than me or whatever. Like, what was your mindset with respect to that when you were approaching that first game?
So I was going with about a squad worth of guys. And we kind of tried to figure out like the platoon level strategy and play the missions that we were given. And so our mindset going in was very much like we bought a ticket for this game that is this different type of game from our normal stuff. And we're already kind of used to like the idea of there being a team commander and getting missions. So
Mm-hmm.
then, like, just answering to a platoon leader instead of like a team commander or like a CO was just that intermittent. And it's like, okay, whatever, that's easy. So in terms of preparation, though, I think bear in mind this is 2012. So airsoft looked very different. So we didn't like really have the level of player I think that we have now, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, GMR was there, like old school GMR, back
Wow.
when they all ran the PTWs and the toe shoes.
Yeah.
That was like the big deal was like, oh my God, this team is like super good and a big deal at the time. But honestly, I think we just went in like, all right, we're going to try to play the missions, focus on that, like immerse ourselves into the game and the scenario, do what we're told, and just do the best we can within that. We understood that there'd be things that we're not good at yet or things we didn't know, but we kind of just went in like, let's see what this is like. Let's figure this out. And this first run might suck, but then
Mm-hmm.
we'll get better as the game goes on.
Right. And how did that shake out? Like, how did your plan survive first contact with the enemy, so to speak? And what were some of the lessons that you learned, like the big stuff that you learned early on in this game, and I guess the future types of games that you would have played? And how did that inform sort of how you moved forward with your team?
So some of the big things that we learned, I think we definitely learned the importance of like accountability within a squad, because one of the things I think people overlook as a duty of a squad leader at airsoft, because most people come from their local field and it's a smaller place, rounds are quicker, most of the time you're not having to maintain like where everybody is on a large facility that radios might not cover all of. So I
Mm-hmm.
think early on, one of the earliest lessons we learned was trying to maintain squad accountability and how important it is that you're just using your basic levels of communication, not even just radios, but just voice, just talking to each other and like really knowing what you're going to do. And then having kind of a procedure for certain things you're going to do. Like after an engagement, get ACE reports, learn, like, see how everyone's doing on ammo, how everyone's doing on has anyone been hit? Can you just medic them back in? How's everyone doing on water? Like that. So ACEs, ammo, casualties, equipment. So that's the report that you want to get for something like that. And that
Mm-hmm.
really helped with maintaining squad cohesion, because normally you go to these big games with these big facilities and some people really struggle to keep their group together. But just that alone, that one thing, that is going to improve your airsoft game like 100-fold, not just in the social aspect of being able to play with your friends, but also in the aspect of being more competitive, because now you haven't just lost half your guys somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think in my thinking about these big games like that, like this is a really good piece of information that you're providing here, especially to me again in a very self-serving
Mhm.
way. Like I'm filing that one away for later
Yeah, totally.
because I've often thought about that. It's like I go, we play games at our field all the time, and John and I are like, all right, man, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. Oh, I got hit, and then I get turned around, and now he's off doing one thing, and now I'm at the respawn coming back to the game, being like, okay, well, what am I doing? Like, what's going on? And so when you talk about that cohesion, like I think that becomes very, very important. Uh, because in my mind, I'm like, well, what's going to happen to me when I go to Iron Horse and I get hit and John's not hit and I go to respawn? Then what? Well, then what you're talking about right there becomes, keeps me in the game with my friends as opposed to just, linking up with some randos, right?
Yeah, and I think part of it is going to be using comms if you need to, if you can, in order to be like, hey, I'm at the respawn. And then one of the things I think a lot of people do is they go to the respawn alone and then they leave alone.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. Again, if you want to maintain unit cohesion and focus on playing with your friends, go to the respawn and wait a little bit. And then people who are out, if you've lost like a third of your squad and they're back at respawn, consider like just doing something crazy or finishing out the current engagement, and then either holding position so that your squad back at your squad mates back at spawn can link up with you at your current pause, or consider falling back to re-equip, because like at AMS you can't reload magazines in the field.
Mhm.
So that's going to be a consideration as ammo and resource management as well. And at Milsim West, you have your issued ammo and your water and your supplies away from your ruck. So when you're out away from your ability to resupply, supply management becomes another reason that you go back to respawn, not just getting shot with BBs.
Yeah, and that certainly doesn't sound like a cool guy consideration. It's how am I going to manage my resources or what have you. But it certainly sounds, and especially I think like at a game like Milsim West, where it's even
Mm-hmm.
more strict than AMS. You really need to consider that, and it's not something you're going to practice per se, but it's certainly something you need to consider, right?
Well, it
So,
just has to be a constant thought process, just
right.
always be managing those logistical assets.
Right. So, and you sort of touched on this a little bit, but like looking forward to now. So now that you
Mhm.
have, very many of these experiences under your belt, both as a
Yeah.
player, as an admin, war boss, what have you. Um, what do you think aside from this? Like, what is it do you think that players really tend to focus on, or even sometimes fixate on to the detriment of other aspects that it really is not as important as that they think it is?
So I'm gonna try to say this as nicely as possible because I also am a big nerd for like how I look at games and looking cool and having all the latest gear. But I think a lot of players wind up wanting to go for a certain look to the point that certain practical considerations get left to the wayside. And I think people also think that they need too much. So
Hmm.
players kind of worry about checking so many boxes that then the details of the quality of the check those boxes are getting kind of falls to the wayside. And I think that's one of the biggest, failings that I see from a lot of new players is they'll show up and they've like got this really cool looking like hype beast costume, but then I ask them if they have any kind of rain layer, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't think about that part. No, I didn't have anything that matched." And I'm like, "All right, that's gonna be great until it's 36 degrees and raining at night."
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing is sometimes the airsoft considerations go before like the fashion and the costuming part go before the practical considerations, and I
Hmm.
think you can serve both. But some players lean too far into one direction and don't think about the other.
Yeah, and do you ever see or have you experienced situations where, like, you mentioned, and we often hear like buy once, cry once kind of deal, right?
Mhm.
Like getting good quality gear and stuff. Have you seen situations where the quality of that checkbox that people are making, it's like, oh well, yes, I have this, but it sucks
Oh
because
yeah.
it's just like I just threw it together. Do you have an example in mind?
So this is going to be an example that's like not exactly applicable to AMS, but I do
Hmm.
think it can relate. One of the examples I can think of is when you go to Milsim West, and you see the people who have the cheapest, crappiest backpack and the biggest, like least packable sleeping bag. It's like,
Hmm.
yes, you have those items, but you'd be better off if you didn't have the sleeping bag, literally, because the sleeping bag you have is strapped to the outside of your ruck, getting wet, so it's not even going to be usable, and it's swinging all over the place. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
like making the thing ride improperly. It's and then you see examples like I would say at an AMS game. Another good example would be I once had a squad leader at one of these games who bought a whole brand new Cry uniform and Cry plate carrier setup, spent so much money, and did not have a place to put his radio. So
Hmm.
his radio was clipped to his cummerbund, and in the first push, it flew off, and I never had radio contact with my squad leader ever again.
Yeah, that sounds very typical. That's typical airsoft for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think one of the things that the way that I've been wrapping my head around some of these things is like I'm making the contrast with like ultra running and like super long distance running where there's
Mm-hmm.
a principle that I follow is you have to fix small problems immediately, because if they keep occurring, then it's going to be a really big. So if you got a rock in your shoe and you adjust your gait, for example, and you do that for 35 kilometers, that's a problem. Like, you're going to be in a real hard shape. So where I'm going with this is with airsoft, similar. Like, if you're playing at your local field and something is like not working correctly, but you're like sort of just dealing with it, if you're going to be playing airsoft for like 5 hours on your feet, that problem is going to get significantly more
Oh,
impactful
totally.
as the event goes, right?
Absolutely. If you've got something that's a failure point at a local game, it will fail at the big game. Like, I have yet to see an occasion where that was not true.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially when you see, like, man, I've heard this before a lot, where it's like, airsoft gear, it's fine for airsoft, right? Which is probably true in the context of a smaller game. But then when you're going through and you're rucking through the woods for like 3 hours or whatever, meaningfully, it's the same. If you're rucking through the woods with a chest rig that's, $40 versus a chest rig that's $100, well, it doesn't matter if this is real or not. It's still the same activity, and you're putting that same stress on it. And chances are, if you got a cheap plastic buckle, maybe that cheap plastic buckle will fail, and then you'll, be out of chest rig or whatever, right?
Yeah, and there's obviously, like, it's not all just price related. A lot of
Oh,
it
for
is
sure.
also,
Yeah.
like, just general build quality related.
Hmm.
And some things are built for some uses and some things are not. Like, personally, I don't think the Cry G3 uniform is a good idea for a woods game in general. Versus, like, the field uniforms or like ACUs, I think, are much better. But it's all about knowing, like, what you're using for what purpose, right?
Hmm.
And having all of these failure points, yeah, they all need to be as reinforced as possible. And the more reinforced all those are, then yeah, the less likely they're going to be to fail. But it's also about, how it's going to fit and ride on your body as much as anything else. And I think a lot of people don't think about that, and they'll have a poorly adjusted chest rig that's like kind of hanging off and sagging, and they'll have a backpack and they won't use the hip belt. That and that's what blows my mind, is when I see people using their backpack and they don't have the hip belt. Literally, you like show them how to adjust the pack and use the hip belt, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, I should have been doing this all along."
Yeah. Yeah. Funny how, properly adjusted kit makes a really big difference for longevity, right? And like the amount of effort you're putting into it. And again, no experience doing that for like big airsoft games, but lots of experience doing that, like pounding the pavement, so to speak.
And
And
that all translates.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I sort of intimated this a little bit before as we were talking as well, but one of the concerns that players might have, and certainly I think if you are kind of like me and you're coming from what appears to you as being a smaller community, like, we play an open
Mm.
game here, we have 20 players. If we have a big game, you got like 50 players, like, it's very easy to feel like we're a small community. And the concern is when you're going to one of these national events, it's going to be full of highly skilled BB SEALs, players who are just much better than you because you come from a shitty small community. Basically, you're not going to be able to compete. You're going to be a small fish in a big pond. And how have you seen that work out in your reality?
I have seen it work out two very distinct ways. It goes one of two ways. It either goes that, yeah, like, they weren't really prepared and they didn't really, like, do a great job of adapting because they were just so unprepared. Like, they didn't read the rule set sometimes, is one of the things I see.
Hmm.
And then it becomes, a totally different game for them as opposed to what other people are doing. Or people will go out and it's their first time and they were, excited or nervous or whatever. So they read everything they could. They watched videos. They like asked relevant questions in Discord groups or whatever. And then they come out and they just try to roll in with the community and then to just kill it.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people assume that so much of how you do at these bigger games is down to your, like, individual skill level as a squad. And it's not, because you're one squad of guys, or maybe you're a platoon if you're like a whole group going from a whole community, which if you can rock a platoon to your first game, do it. Uh,
Noted.
yeah. But if you just have a squad, you're going to a game that's got 400 or 500 players. Your squad of 10 guys is not going to be able to make a significant difference just going and hammering themselves out against the combined forces of the other team.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like go in, I think willing to learn, willing to engage with the chain of command, willing to like really buy into the missions, buy into what the game is, I think you get the most out of it. And whether or not you're the most successful in like, oh, we won all of our objectives, took so few casualties, did all this better, you could get to the highest level of BB achievement, and part of your process is still tactical AARs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the process of improvement never stops. The day you started playing Airsoft is the day you became forever bad, because you'll never be as good as you want to be. So,
Yeah.
But if you just roll in and you know that you're Sisyphus picking up that boulder and you just put your all into pushing it, it's so fun still.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget. I mean, it happened to me this weekend where like we lost a game or whatever, and I was like, man, like I don't think, I said to John, I was like, what did we do wrong? And he just looked at me, he's like, we didn't do anything wrong. We just lost, right? You can do everything right and still lose, right? That's how it is.
Oh yeah.
And so, especially like for us, like looking at this big game, it's like, oh my God, like all the guys are going to be so good and so much better than us. And like, I'm not necessarily sure that that's true, but even if it were, like you just said, it's not individuals who are going to make or break the day. Like it's the group effort that you really have no control over, right? Like you said, like even if you have control over your squad, there's a lot more going on than just you guys. And is that really visible to you as like a run of the mill player? Like as a leader, it's a different conversation, but like as an individual player, how much visibility do you really have into what's going on to the broader situation in the event?
I think it depends on the game. I think, it depends on your game. It depends on your chain of command. It depends on, how your group is engaging with the game. But I generally think it's, if you know what you're looking at, it becomes easy to, intimate some of those details and figure that out. But otherwise, you're kind of relying on what you're told by the chain of command. And if you have a good chain of command, then hopefully your chain of command is doing a good job explaining what the process is and like what's going on and what your, platoon's part is in the picture. And then your platoon leader is going to say what your squad's part is in the platoon picture. So it becomes like, hey, we're doing this piece of the pie, whereas our whole platoon is doing this piece, and that's all coming out to this piece. So a lot of that comes down to how you interface with chain of command, how into the tactical side of the game you are. I think it's also kind of controllable in that way. If you want to just be a rifleman and get told what you're doing, you can do that. But if you want to be a fire team leader even, and just like maintain accountability of your like 4 or 5 guys, and then they'll have another fire team leader, another 4 or 5 guys, then your squad leader, now you're actively into the tactical picture, at least insofar as like what the intent is and then how you can carry out that intent.
Right. And and this is a good point too, that you're mentioning, like around figuring out sort of where you fit into that sort of larger plan, either you as an individual contributor or then you as a fire team leader or as a squad leader or what have you. I guess as a new player coming into an event like that, how do you figure that out? Like how do you integrate yourself, I guess, into what presumably is going to be a quote unquote well-oiled machine of expert or experienced players, right? As best as you can for BB Wars, right? Like how do you integrate yourself, like coming in from the outside, especially if you are like many people who might be listening, where it's like it's going to be me and a buddy and somebody else, and that's it, and we don't know anybody else.
So the best way I've seen to do that is try to sign up if you can with like a larger group that goes to some of these games. A lot of promoters, especially Milsim West, really has like the impression group culture, right? And there will be groups that do different impressions of different countries, so all the different costumes, or there will be like just platoons that go as normie militia or normie NATO, and then you can just integrate with someone who knows what they're doing. That's an easy hack, right? Just get inside a larger group that knows what they're doing, and then all you have to do is kind of like be their like pet project for the weekend. And it makes the experience a lot better if you do your first time that way. Or if you like can't do that, let's say like you are just solo queuing, you really don't know anybody, you can't get in with a larger group, then what I think makes the most sense is try to engage in as much of the pregame communication as possible, because a lot of groups, even if you just get randomly assigned, right, to like another squad or two of people, a lot of them will want to make like a Facebook planning chat or a Discord planning chat or something like that. And they might reach out to you through whatever means of communication you put out there, or you might be able to post up in a group and be like, hey, me and whatever are coming, like, does anyone want to take a few randoms? I just, my big thing is I encourage everybody to embrace the social aspect of the game before the game, because then you can go in and have at least somewhat of an idea of what kind of group you're walking into. And that is such an advantage versus trying to crash course it all the day up.
Yeah, and certainly when it will help you knowing when you show up at least that you have sort of a friendly face, or at least someone who you can connect with, to especially if it's your first ever time going. And I think that's the advantage that John and I have, is that we don't have to worry about that part, because we know we're going to be rolling with a bunch of guys who are like dialed in terms of, we've done this before, like these are the things that matter, these are the things that you don't need to worry about. And I can just be told what to do and I will do that thing and it will be fine. But a corollary question to this is, one big concern, I mentioned this before, is like, what happens if you get turned around, right? So you're by yourself, or you have, you and your buddy, you get confused, fog of war, all this kind of stuff. You feel like you're not being effective. What do you do in these types of events when you don't know what to do?
So the biggest thing that I find helps if someone like really doesn't know what to do or what's going on is, if you're truly by yourself, find a way to no longer be by yourself if you can. I mean, there will obviously be, at like an AMS game, there's going to be a permanent respawn, right? Go back to the permanent respawn. Like, if nothing else, hopefully you've maintained like some sense of cardinal direction where that is. If you haven't, then follow the game's emergency procedures. Emergency procedures for lost players are usually laid out in the briefing, or there might be a guideline for them in the event tax op. So obviously know and follow those procedures if you're truly so lost you don't know where you are in the field. I don't see that happen that often, except for like nighttime at Milsim West. Like, that's when people love to get lost.
Yeah, of course.
But other than that, if then you fall back in with your larger element and find a staff member if no one else. Like, there's usually embedded command staff. So go up to your embedded command staff and say, I'm with this group. We're totally like turned around. We don't know what's going on. Can you get in contact with them? If you can't get in contact, right? Like, if you don't have comms, first rule of Airsoft, comms will not work.
Yeah.
But maybe they can get in contact with another person in the field. Like at Milsim West, for example, all of the cadre are the platoon sergeants, and the platoon sergeants are generally on a company net, and then the company net is, to the company commander. So theoretically, any member of cadre should be able to talk to each other. Gun Gamers Productions, we do a similar thing. Then, AMS, I think they have like their combat controllers who are interspersed throughout, and then their CO is usually a staff member. So those guys will all have the information you're looking for sure. And if you can't get in contact with anyone else who's within your chain of command, just go right to staff. That's what they're there for.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people need to keep in mind. And I'm certainly, it's not that I'm concerned about getting turned around, but it's the fear of the unknown. Like, what if I'm just sitting around and I don't know if I'm being effective? Like, I get that there's a certain level of sitting around that is associated with Milsim, right? Like, I was mentioning when we were talking before the episode, like Ambo was at Border War and he was like, well, I was looking at that road for like 3 hours. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that's the recon job that you picked. So, and he was fine with that. But at the same time, like, you might be in a situation where you're like, oh, well, I don't actually know if I need to be doing this, right?
I have a really good example for this, actually. At Guardian Centers 2021, the Caspian Milsim West that was that year, I think it was Caspian Assault. I was actually recon for that, and we were posted up outside the main town, in a couple of busted out cars while it was raining, and I just had a thermal scope, and I'm just watching the entire like attack happen and just radioing in enemy positions to my guys who are on the assault. And I would just see tag-ins just start come flying in at the enemy CCPs. It was so great. But then there was a lightning stoppage, and I was in this burned out car for like 30 minutes getting rained on with the lightning stoppage as well. And I finally like sent a message. I couldn't get through on radio. My radio like stopped working from the rain. So I ended up sending a message to the group chat for the actual company, and I tagged Chris Bast, I think was the company commander, and we were a company asset, and I tagged him and I said, hey, Kyle and I are still out in these cars. Do we need to go somewhere? And he's like, oh shit, I forgot you guys are out there. They sent a truck to come get us.
Oh my God.
But that's a good example of like sometimes you need to self-advocate. Like if people are busy, like, you know, Chris was the company commander, there was 200 fucking people under him. Like there's so much going on. He's got so many cadre. He's wrangling cats, trying to get everybody indoors because Guardian Centers mandated the lightning stoppage. And I had to like self-advocate a little bit and be like, hey, we're here. We probably shouldn't be walking because like they don't want anyone outside in the lightning. And that's when he's like, yeah, shit, we'll get you guys out. And they sent a truck. But, so total example of sometimes you just need to like have that conscientiousness and just self-advocate.
Yeah, well, this is a really good lead into the second part of the question that I was thinking about, which is like, especially like if you watch videos and like try and get informed for these kinds of events, especially like a game like Iron Horse or whatever at Guardian Center, which is so cool. Like you will, because it's YouTube, you will see everybody else's highlights, which means you'll see all the cool guy stuff. And there's going to be a lot of cool guy stuff that happens, whether it's, you know, fighting in the mock subway tunnel that they have there apparently,
that place is
you know,
cool.
or maybe it's like riding around in APCs like you're at Border War or whatever. Like there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that are going to go on. Is it realistic for you to expect that you will get a chance to participate in that? And B, coming back to what you were just talking about, how much do you need to be entrepreneurial or self-advocate to get into those kinds of missions or to get that sort of gameplay experience?
Well, so I know AMS does like their direct action missions, and like I know Third Coast has their tier 1 missions. So some of that stuff you see published from some of those games is literally like missions that cost extra money to play, or like the helicopter thing, the helicopter ride. Those are tickets that are sold like with game registration. Those are a totally like separate thing, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's one of those things where if you want to do some of that stuff, you're just going to have to pony up and pay for like an extra ticket.
Right.
Or, you know, then you've got the alternative of, well, just within normal gameplay, how do you get to do as much as possible, right? And that's going to involve a lot of, I think, just interface with the whole game. If you go out and you and your squad are just kind of doing your own thing, you'll be able to make your own fun. But if anything really crazy cool happens that like they needed an organized, like prepared group for, you might not be around to see it. Or if you know, are just sitting around and you guys are spending a lot of time at Respawn and some crazy cool thing starts happening out in the field, you might not be around to see it. A lot of it is kind of luck of the draw, I think. But if you really want to get the most that you can out of interacting with like all the different scenarios and systems within the game, that's totally down to like how you and your guys buy into and play the scenario, and how you interface and do that with the other players, with the staff, with the commanders. I think that's going to maximize like the amount of cool different stuff you're going to see, as opposed to just like going out and doing your own thing and making your own fun. But if you want to go out and make your own fun, like, yeah, that's allowed at AMS, especially. MSW, you got to get the right cadre and like still have total accountability. You can be allowed to make your own fun if you can prove that you can be trusted with it. But yeah, but that also takes, to a certain extent, some of it is like repeat customer bias, right? Some people who know the games, know the systems, and know a lot of people are going to get put in better positions than others for whatever reason, because like they just know what they're doing a little bit more. So, for example, I rarely see that the element that gets sent out early on an ambush on Friday night for Milsim West that's usually not like the platoon of rando new guys. That's usually like a cadre who has a group that they kind of think, okay, you guys can be a good opening engagement.
Hmm.
So that's a little bit different than the AMS like type of dam and whatnot breakdown, but it's still the same type of thing, and I think it does apply.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't. I mean, maybe people who are listening will feel differently, but you're probably not attending your very, very first national level event going, I want to be a platoon leader, right? Like typically,
Mhm.
unless that was your trade in the military that you were in and you literally just rotated out of that position, like it's probably, and even still, it's probably not a great idea. Like there's a lot of fundamentals you probably need to pick up before you start doing that in airsoft. So in the same way, like I
Yeah.
can absolutely see being like, hey, we have this very special role for a specialist player that requires a very high level of accountability and responsibility. Are we going to pick a random player who is their first ever game? Probably not. Like that part is totally understandable. But I take your point too around engaging with the players who are more experienced and the
Hmm.
leaders of the day to make sure that they at least know, I guess, that you're interested in doing that
Yep.
kind of stuff too, because they can't. Well, it's not they can't pick you, but they're less likely to pick you if they don't know that you actually even care about doing that kind of thing, right?
Exactly. And how you engage with that, and I also think the ways that you engage with some of that also say a lot about you. Like one of my favorite quotes, this was from I don't know if you know Blue Jean Operator on YouTube, Nick. He's another Milsim West cadre, and we were
Mm-hmm.
talking. He was telling me about he had a platoon one time, and some of the guys in the platoon were like former military who were super into like doing this MSW thing, and then some of the other people were like just airsofters. And Nick's a former Ranger, so he wants all the former military guys to be like the hard chargers. And he was after the game, he's like, dude, all the people who were most excited to be there were the damn airsofters.
Yeah.
So he took them out and did all the crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, I think that's good for them because I mean, that's what you want to live your action hero, right? That's
Yeah.
why you're there, right?
And it was
Yeah.
so cool to see, like, a moment like that where, and I literally just said to Nick, I'm like, yeah, man, there's no replacement for enthusiasm. He's like, goddamn right.
Yeah. So I just want to talk so briefly about the flip side of that. So as a new player, like if I'm in a situation where, because yeah, okay, so let's back up for a second.
Yeah.
Milsim events have a lot of different types of fun, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of type 1 fun, like, wow, this is super fun. But there's also some like type 2 and even type 3 fun, which is like, oh, this sucks. But then in retrospect, you were like, wow, that was so fun. Or, oh, this sucks. And in retrospect, you're like, I'm not even sure if that was fun, right? But regardless,
Yeah.
like, the whole like, this sucks, but I like the way it sucks or whatever. But like,
Yeah.
there absolutely could be situations where you are no longer having fun doing the thing that you are doing, and understanding that this is a game and b something that you paid for.
Hmm.
How should in your experience or in your opinion, how does a player deal with that? Like if I'm somewhere and I'm literally like, I hate this is not, I'm not having fun at all, what am I supposed to do about that?
So that's also where self-advocation comes for, right? Or self-advocacy. I think
Hmm.
that's another situation where that becomes relevant. I'm going to use an example from one of my games. We had a player at one of my games who somebody within their chain of command that like they had initially been playing under, they were like just they were not vibing well with like how that was going. It was a total like disagreement of style, and this player felt like kind of disrespected. So we're like, all right, well, we'll just put you somewhere else.
Hmm.
And we did. And then that player had a lot more fun because they let us know that they had this like problem that was developing. And we're like, okay, well, we don't want people to have a problem. So we solved the problem. And then that player had a lot more fun. Um, but that's some of those situations that are very realistic is maybe you're in a squad where your squad leader lost their radio on the first charge in because they bought their all new cry setup and didn't have a
Yeah.
radio about. Well, guess what? I went up to the, commander of the UFS faction at that AMS game, and I said, "Hey, I have no accountability of my squad leader. Also, turns out like they left for lunch for like a super long time. So I literally went, I have no accountability of my squad leader, and they don't have a radio." And the commander goes, "Cool, you're the squad leader now," and we just rolled like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes down to something as simple as like fixing a leadership structure that's not working right. Like sometimes it's that simple. And then sometimes it's as simple as, well, what I'm tasked with right now is not something I'm very interested in. Maybe you can find a new tasking. Maybe like you've been sitting for too long at the patrol base because, your cadre thought you needed a longer rest rotation, but now you're bored. And now you can walk up and say, hey, like my guys are really itching for something, and he can give you something to do that's going to keep you a little more busy. Or you're at an
Mm-hmm.
AMS game and you've been sitting at respawn because you don't know what the scenario is. Same thing. Like just be able to advocate for yourself. And one of the things that I think helps a lot with this as well from the player end. Now, you are the customer, you paid to have a good time. Staff's job is to try to help you have a good time. But always remember, too, that like the staff are working within their own framework of what their guidelines are, what their scenario looks like, how many other players they're trying to deal with. So it always works best if you go in with the mindset that staff is trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes people have bad experiences with staff at some games. I've seen it happen. But it never helps when people start devolving into a shouting match or getting
Yeah,
like
for
mad
sure.
and like you're not having fun, so you're salty and you're yelling at the staff, and then the staff members like, what the hell? I've got this guy in my face, and starts yelling at you. Like, luckily, it does not happen at my games, thank God. But I've seen it happen,
Yeah.
and it never helps. So always try to go in and just feel out what within the scenario can realistically be done to solve your issue. And sometimes if the answer is nothing, then hopefully that doesn't happen, because in my opinion, that would be a very bad game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fair point, right? If you're like, oh, well, this sucks and I'm not having fun or whatever. I mean, part of your homework should be, okay, well, what is going to make me feel better? Like, what do I need to happen, right,
Yeah.
to make this better? Is it like you were saying, like a different tasking? And I think, especially as a new player and someone who doesn't have the experience of having, um, these having done these Milsim events, you can often think it's like, oh well, if I get a crappy tasking, well that's it, like I'm just gonna have to suck it up and deal with it. But the reality is, well, if you go to someone and say, hey listen, like, is there any way we can change this up, they very well may be like, yeah sure, give me half an hour, we'll see what we can do, or
Yeah.
whatever. And going up and shouting at them, obviously we've talked about that many times on the show before, like
Yeah.
that doesn't help anything anyway. But it's good for people to know, like that's something that is not only like, you shouldn't necessarily reserve that for like the dire straits of, well, I'm going to walk off the field if they don't do something about this. But like, it's okay as long as you're not being an asshole about it, right? Like fundamentally,
Yeah.
it's okay for you to self advocate for that kind of stuff too. And it's good to hear that from you.
Absolute. Well, and that's, to me, like that level of self-advocacy is also an engagement with the systems of the game. Like the
Mm-hmm.
point of the game is for you to come have fun with the game. And if you're not having fun for some reason, then go engage with the systems that are meant to make you have fun.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said just earlier, like enthusiasm is there's no replacement for it. So if you're enthused and having fun, you're obviously going to be a better, more effective member of the team than if you're just, unhappy somewhere or just sitting in respawn waiting, right?
Yeah. And I, one of the things that I think like some people let color a game for them though, and this is something I really want to nip in the bud for some players. A lot of the time, what I see that makes players mad at a game is like they'll be poopy pants that they think the other team is cheating, or that like their gun went down. And it'll be things that like the game host can't really effectively control. And
Mm-hmm.
then they're mad at the game host or the game that like all these bad things happened. And I think to some extent, enjoying a game despite things going wrong takes totally suspending, your idea of what you expect out of a game to a certain extent. Like I personally don't like quitting games just because a gun breaks if I can avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather just keep powering through. So like my RPD had its hop up die at the most recent 40-hour game I went to from Grimnir. Well, am I going to quit the game because my RPD isn't hopping BBs anymore? Or am I
Mm-hmm.
going to embrace the meme and try to get as close as I can so maybe I can artillery them in on people? It, it's
Yeah.
to- it's totally like you just have to be willing to embrace a new experience and roll with the things that go wrong. Like, oh, the other team is cheating. Well, whatever. I'm just going to shoot him more, and then I'm going to do as much as I can and not even worry about it.
Well, and it's funny what you're saying about the RPD because it ties into what you were saying earlier, which is that these types of games are not won by individual players. And so if you're saying that, well, my gun went down, so is the only value that you bring to your team the fact that you have a rifle, or is there other things that you also bring to the table? Like your radio, your ability to communicate, your ability to coordinate, like maybe now your gun went down, you're the medic now, congratulations, right? Or something like that. To your point, how do you reframe the experience that you're having so you're not being poopy pants about it? Now, obviously, I get it. Like if your gun breaks, you get
Oh,
salty,
yeah, no, that
right?
sucks.
That is, I'm not suggesting otherwise, but like, especially for a game like that, like you could be on the cusp of having a completely new experience that you never have had just by sort of trying to embracing and rolling with it.
Listen, I have never felt more cool than for the amount of pistol kills that I got because my RPD was worthless. Okay,
Yeah.
so that alone made it worth it. But one of the things that I actually try to tell people, like a slogan of mine now for some of these longer scenario, like bigger national level airsoft games, not all gameplay is gunplay.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's
Yeah.
other elements to the game, especially if you've got a game that's like limited ammo and there's medic water, or there's a mission going on at the AMS game. Like pick a role that you can fulfill no matter what and just embrace playing that role.
That's a really good way of thinking about it. Not all airsoft gameplay is gunplay. Yeah. Um, there's something I wanted to ask you about too, and it has to do with sort of the endurance aspect of the physical endurance aspect of a lot of these games. I know that for Milsim West in particular, you and your crew, which is Task Force Keg, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
you have some sort of voluntary physical standards that you guys use to make sure that the members of the team are capable of performing at certain different levels, which is voluntary, but we can talk about that in a second.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
think a lot of airsofters gloss over the fact that these multi-hour games or even multi-day games in the context of like a 40-hour game or border war or something like that, they're physically taxing, right? And I see people all the time at our local games, on the weekends, that are just like, it's like they've blown a tire after 45 minutes, right? They're just like, oh, I'm so done. We did a 6-hour objective game at the start of the season and players were bushed after 3 hours, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that shake out for new players at these sort of national level games and sort of the motivation behind the Task Force Keg physical guidelines?
So one of the big things that I observe in terms of first-time players at some of these bigger games is some of them forget that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of players will try to go as hard as they can for as long as they can, and they will just hit a wall. And a lot of players have never really seen how hard they can go for how long. So then they hit that wall and they're like, oh shit, now I'm gassed for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things I think a lot of people need to remember if they don't really know what they're getting into is like, feel it out, pace yourself. There's so much game time in total. Like, don't worry about feeling like you have to be in on every little thing all the time. But like, know how you can go. But the other part of it is that if you want to go hard at all, it very much bears having some level of physical preparation. And like with the Task Force Keg guidelines, right? Our basic standard is 3 miles in 1 hour with your full sustainment ruck. And the idea behind that is that honestly, Milsim West does not have as much rucking as people like to say it does. You can move a lot if you know what you're doing and you get really into it. But in terms of actually like moving with your full backpack and all your gear, I have yet to do more than a 3 mile movement at Milsim West. And well, at least with ruck, I should say. But if you can pack your ruck and move with it and be able to carry it and at least beat that pretty easy time, that just shows that you've achieved the basic level of preparation necessary to complete the event.
Mm-hmm.
And we really want everybody to do that before coming out, and we will not allow you to play any form of specialty role if you don't complete that. Because to our mind, like, we're trying to include everybody and let everybody come play no matter where they're at, no matter what they're doing. But if we're going to put someone in a specialty role where they might be the machine gunner who's got half of the platoon's ammo in their box mag, we need to make sure they're not going to walk off the field with it because they're too tired.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a big part of it. That's our like base level standard. If you can't complete it for some reason or you don't complete it, we're not going to tell you can't come play with us, but you're going to come play Rifleman, feel out the event, like, see what you can do and play as hard as you can from there. And that's still like, you're still coming and you're still playing and you're still like in the group, but we need to make sure that the people who have the physical preparation are able to do some of those other jobs. And ultimately the standard's not hard, but then we've got our higher level standards. And this is where we start really putting in the work for like positive reinforcement and like group culture to achieve certain other things. We have our carry the boats challenge. And the carry the boats challenge is, and that's from there. So David Goggins is the guy who's like really famous for coining it, but there's a TikTok of this really hammered guy screaming about carrying the boats, just throwing up way too much. And we thought that was the funniest thing ever. So we named our challenge after it. But carry the boats is your full sustainment ruck or a bag weighing 35 pounds. If for some reason you don't have that all together, 12 miles, one continuous movement. The only time limit for that is it has to be one continuous movement with no significant breaks. Most people are coming in for that anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. And a lot of people have completed that. We'll also give it to you if you climb a mountain more than 4,000 feet tall with your ruck, because then you've got all the elevation gain, and especially in Northeast trails, it's just straight up.
Yeah.
But 10th Mountain, the real group that we do an impression of, they hike Whiteface as like their PT as a group sometimes. So that was a good bit of inspiration. And then we've got and you get a patch for that. So if you do that, and you do the carry the boats, you get a patch. It's this really gaudy, like crazy patch. I don't have one right with me, but that's like a culture thing. And we've got people who say, I want that patch. I want to get that. And then we've got our next level where it's the whiskey standard. So if you do 12 miles in 3 hours with your full sustainment pack, that means you've done the Army's standard, basically. Like their standard is a 12-mile ruck in 3 hours, usually. And so we based our like maximum like challenge based fitness standard on that. And I'm like, all right, if you do this, you get a carry the boats patch and you get a bottle of whiskey. And then you become one of like the whiskey squad. So that's our goal, is to build like the positive reinforcement and encourage people to get into like these different levels of shape or complete these different challenges, purely just for like a group culture aspect. And we have people in the group who are of all levels of fitness, all shapes and sizes, but all of them are into it. And all of them are like happy for each other when somebody completes it. So it's a really good, like positive mentality. And that's the main thing I think people need to focus on, is just enjoying that for its own sake, even as much as for the airsoft.
Yeah. Just for non-American audiences, I mean, 12 miles is just under 20K, right? So 20K in 3 hours is, especially with the full kit, like you're going at a pretty good clip, right? So yeah, that's a pretty decent challenge. But I think, it's especially like, okay, well, the 20 miles is certainly one piece, but even your basic standard, you're talking about 3 miles, that's like just under 5K or whatever. Like that's totally reasonable, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like if you're coming to airsoft in general, you will be able to be on your feet for at least a certain period of time. And with a little bit of work, you can, if you're not already there. And I would say, if I look at most people who play at our field, I would say many of them could complete that right now, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah. And if not, then it's something to work towards. And like you're saying, you've created this environment where people will encourage you and motivate you as a group, not with wrapped up bars of soap in the night, but like just positive reinforcement to get there, right, as your own challenge. And I'm, especially for me, like I'm all about physical endurance challenges and like seeing how far you can push. But you talk about hitting that wall, right? And that's a super important thing for people to understand, because if you've never experienced that before, let me tell you, like it's a rude awakening when you're just like, what is happening right now? Like I have my legs, I have no go. Like I've just hit that wall, or I've, as we call it, running bonked, right? Like I've got nothing left. and then you're kind of screwed, right? So you really need to pace yourself, and we've talked about that before as well. Like, always make sure you're eating and drinking and stuff like that. Not that I have
Yep.
too much of a problem with that, but I have
Well, and
lots of
that's part of
practice
your
too,
resource
right?
management, honestly, is
Yeah.
managing your own resources.
Yeah. And so it's certainly something for new players to be mindful of, and carrying food, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
candies or M&Ms, or if you want to be fancy with running gels or whatever, but like honestly M&Ms and running gels are basically the same thing anyway. So, like
I'm
Courtney DeWalter is
bougie. I
running
always bring.
or she's running ultra marathons, like pounding down burritos and drinking Coke. So I think whatever you got on you is probably fine.
Yeah, whatever works. The
Yeah.
other thing that I think some players forget is problem solving in the field, right? Like,
Hmm.
we alluded to this a little bit earlier with the guns. Like, oh, my gun went down, so I can't really play. Well, I've seen people be like, oh, well, my sleeping bag tore, so now I can't play. And it's like, well, can we get some tape? Does someone have an extra blanket? Or another thing that I've seen is we had a guy whose insulin froze overnight at one of these games.
Oof.
And we're literally on top of a mountain in the middle of West Virginia, and we're thinking like, shit, what do we do? And luckily my buddy Lutz is an EMT, and he's like, just put it in your armpits and thaw it until he's able to use it, and make sure he doesn't eat anything. But if you have that level of knowledge, then that level of problem solving in the field, obviously that guy made it totally fine, or I wouldn't have finished that story. But
Yeah. Yeah, really.
but that's the thing, is like being able to problem solve like that is so important as well. That's another really important skill in addition to the endurance. And if you do get so gassed that like you're like, oh man, I need to quit, you might not need to quit, you might just need a long break.
Yeah. Or a burrito.
Yeah.
Um, so listen, the last thing I sort of want to talk about, and for a lot of airsofters, like, appearances are obviously really important. We talk about how airsoft is a fashion show and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But for someone like yourself who has attended many events like this and others in the past, it probably becomes very easy for you to spot players for whom this is sort of their first time at an event like that. The FNGs, as it were, right? The friggin' new
Yeah.
guys. Um, what for you is a telltale sign of a new player? And what would you say is one thing that new players can do more or less of to help them blend in and integrate a little bit more in that respect?
So yeah, I want to specify that, to be honest, out of all the new players I see, whether at like AMS or, Gun Gamers or Milsim West, out of all those new players, I would only say maybe 1 out of 5 of them is really like an FNG. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people do their research and they try to buy into things, and they generally do a pretty good job. But then you get the FNGs, and the FNG is not the guy who looks out of place because of his gear or his gun or whatever other costuming considerations. The FNG is the guy who shows up and has no idea what the rules are, has no idea what any of their guns shoot, clearly doesn't even know like what kind of event they bought a ticket for, but just shows up and is like, all right, yeah, I'm here, and they're going to tell me everything I need to do now. And that is the FNG move. Like, I don't
Hmm.
care if your kit looks dumb. I don't care if your ruck is poorly packed. All of those things can be solved. At least you have that stuff. If
Hmm.
you show up and you have no clue what the base level rules are because you didn't read the rule set, you are that FNG.
Yeah.
So that is the main thing. Read the goddamn rule set.
Yeah. I think definitely not going to be a problem for me because I'm a nerd and I love reading all the rule sets anyway, even for games
Yeah.
that I read the rule set for BFLA, and the chances of me attending that game are basically zero. But regardless,
Yeah.
I think that's a really fair point. And organizing the games, even here, the game that we had at the start of the season, lots of players. And to be fair, like, we have never run a game like that, so many players, it wasn't part of their routine to just look at the game rules. It's like they're going to be told everything. But at a game like that, I mean, you probably want to know what you're getting into at the very least. I had a player come up to me and it's like, I saw this villager. I was wearing my admin vest.
Yeah.
And he's like, I saw this villager walking around with a case and it said TNT on the case. What am I supposed to do with that? And I was like, I don't know, what are you supposed to do with that? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, should I tell my team? I was like, probably. That seems like a good idea. Like, just, like
Yeah.
you're not thinking about that. If you're not familiar with like what is going to be happening at this event. So I can totally appreciate that for sure.
Yeah.
I guess my last question is like, I'm hitting Iron Horse. Like, what am I going? What should I expect, man? Like, what exactly should I be looking out for?
So AMS is AMS in terms of like, because there's a spectrum of Milsim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, Milsim West is super hardcore, sleep in the field, like all that. AMS is to me like the step below that, where it's like, you're not going to sleep in the field, so don't worry about that. But you still have, I think, 10 or 12 hours of gameplay on Saturday. So expect to be potentially away from the respawn for a while. Try to equip yourself as well for that as you can. But know what you need and what you don't need out in the field. I think what people think about at AMS, they think they need a long-term sustainment kit, when realistically, you're going to be going back and forth from the fob to resupply because you have to refill your 7 magazines and, have topped off water. So I would for AMS, I would say expect a more mobile, like, gunfighting experience where you're going to be like rushing to and from different parts of the AO to go have like squad and platoon level skirmishes with maybe a few really organized company things near the beginning and the end of the day, depending on how the leadership plays it. But that's much more like, in some ways, it is just a big airsoft game on a new facility with just the level of organization to make that number of players work. So that's kind of what AMS is like, bread and butter is. That's really what to expect, and be ready for that and lean into that and say, yeah, well, I'm going to go just have what I need for like the airsoft game I'm playing totally within the rules, and then just run with it and lean into that and play it like that. And you're going to have a great time. There will be, certain Milsim elements, but you should never be holding like a 4-hour watch rotation at AMS. Like that's not really how that usually works, unless you have like a group that needs a rest rotation, and then they'll try to keep people closer to spawn so they can have like that dominant area of control and not get encroached on. But that's what you should expect. Like, your spawn is not able to be rolled, so the game is a little bit different in that way, but expect a very heavy, violent time.
Awesome. Well, I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's going to be it's like I said at the start, it's going to be a really new experience for us. I'm going to throw so much pyro. It's going to be stupid. But like, I'm not, listen, this opportunity might not come again. So as much as I can do,
no, just send it. And then here's the problem, right? You're going to get a taste of United States, like, big game airsoft, and now it's all you're going to want to do.
Yeah. But thankfully, I have a budget. I'm not a big YouTuber, so I don't like. Dude, I'm not going to.
I have a budget too, and the budget just all goes into playing airsoft.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. No, but I'm very much looking forward to it. I think, we talked a lot there's a lot of people from the Discord who are attending. We're going to have at least a full squad, maybe even more, depending on how many people decide to show up. We're going to have at least one full VRBO for all of us, so that's going to be something.
Nice.
But yeah,
that's the best part.
Yeah, and so I'm glad to get your feedback and your thoughts and ideas on this, because the social aspect is not going to be the part that I have trouble leaning into, and I'm glad to hear from you that that's probably going to be the most impactful one in terms of making sure that we're integrating in a way that that is meaningful and make sure that we have fun. And I'm going to read the rule set so I don't come across like an FNG, and we should be all set.
You sound like you're on track to have a really good time, and you're also way ahead with the physical preparation because you like run marathons and stuff. Most people go into these games don't do that. You'll be just fine.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. But Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and have this conversation today. I so appreciate it. It's always great to have you on, man.
Of course, dude. I'm always happy to hop on.
All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. That's all we got for you. And listen, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Take care.